Alrighty, we are officially live. I'm excited to get our January 2020 Lunch and Learn off the ground. If you are watching this recording right now, you can fast forward by 5 minutes. We will essentially get started at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time. And so essentially, if you're watching the recording of this, you can just fast forward 5 minutes because we'll just be waiting for everybody who's attending the live session to jump in and get involved. So for anybody who's joining the live session, I'm excited to have you, and I'm excited to begin this workshop. This workshop is about more or less how to build vulnerability into a workplace mentor relationship. You'll be able to, we'll be covering some key topics on how to do it, why is it important, and then just really some key tips and strategies towards really working towards getting to the outcomes that you want in terms of building vulnerability into your mentoring relationship. But like I said, if you are watching the recording of this, go ahead, fast forward by 5 minutes. We will get started at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time. If you are here watching the live stream, that's awesome. The benefit of being in a live stream is that you can interact with me and you can ask your questions, you can make comments, I can talk about any questions or comments you make. And so it's cool to bring everybody together and essentially allow for you to interact with this video and essentially have your questions answered. And by the way, if you do have any questions and you're watching the recording this, you're more than welcome to email myself or anybody on our team with any questions you may have. Be glad to answer them. But it's always great to answer them on a live Lunch and Learn, because if you've got the question, someone else probably does too. So we will get started in like 3.5 minutes, but I'm excited to get going. It looks like we've got a couple people who are in attendance right now. If you do not mind, if you're watching right now and you don't mind putting in your name, saying, where you're from, what company you're working with, a little bit about yourself in the comment section, that would be awesome. I'll make the first comment, just more or less kind of saying like, hi, everyone. Excited to have you all here for the January 2020 Lunch and Learn. Please share a little about yourself. Boom. All right, so made the first comment. We're going to get started in about 2.5 minutes. But yeah, grateful to have you all here. Grateful to be providing this workshop, this Lunch and Learn. And like I said, we'll be talking about vulnerability in a mentoring relationship and why it's so important. I'll go over a lot of the key things that I'll hear about vulnerability, a lot of the key things I hear about mentorship, and I really want to touch on some key things. But grateful to have you all here, grateful that you all are participating in your company's mentor program, and grateful that we're being able to match you all together. Whether you're matched with a mentor who's younger than you or older than you or in a different department than you or the same age as you, we know that mentorship is reciprocal. And by that, I mean that mentorship is a give and take experience, meaning that you're not just getting only insight and you're not just giving insight. It's about both give and take. And that's one of the best things about mentorship. And that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions about mentorship too, is the misconception is that it's all about what am I getting from this or what am I giving to this? Because sometimes maybe you'll talk to somebody who's maybe a little bit older and they think, oh, well, I've got all these years of experience. I don't really have too much to learn. It's like, that's not the case. That doesn't mean that you're done learning. You've got a lot to learn. You've got a lot to gain. You've got a lot to grow from different people who have different perspectives. And then on the flip side, if you're younger and you think there's so much more that I have to learn and I don't know that much, that's not true at all either. You've got a lot to give. And I'm just trying to acknowledge the fact that mentorship is a give and take mutual relationship. And I am wanting to acknowledge that your mentor could be younger, older, in a different department, but we know that if you're invested in this relationship and you're intentional about this relationship, that you can make something really amazing happen and build a really strong bond at work. So Miranda, thank you so much for commenting. Lori, thank you for commenting as well. Very excited to have you both here, and I appreciate you both commenting for this live Lunch and Learn. By the way, this will be recorded, so if you want to watch the recording of this video, or if you want to, for anybody obviously who's not able to attend the live session, they can always watch the recording afterwards. I will send an email with the link to this video after the workshop is complete. But we're going to get started in about 30 seconds. I'm really excited to get going. So we got a few people watching so far. That's awesome. So I'm just going to get everything set up on my end. Great. We'll get started right now. So, hey everyone, my name is Garrett Mintz, and I will be hosting this January Lunch and Learn. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion, the mentor program that's facilitating the mentor program for your company. I essentially love mentorship. I'm all about it. I've been studying it for 8 years, facilitating thousands of mentoring relationships. I love mentorships. And the topic of today's Lunch and Learn is called Building Vulnerability into a Workplace Mentoring Relationship. Now, vulnerability is crucial to building a strong mentor relationship. Without vulnerability, there's no trust. Without trust, there's no oxytocin. Oxytocin is the chemical in our brains that make us feel happy when we are around other people. And so when we come to work and we've got oxytocin with somebody, we get energy from going to work. But if we don't, and we're not really connected, we're not really building a deeper bond with people, I mean, work is essentially going to be potentially an energy taker for us. And so what I'm trying to build, what we're trying to build here with this mentor program is really how can we build vulnerability into this relationship so then you can build trust, which will help build oxytocin in your mind, which will give you energy when you come and be around those people who you're mentored with at work, who you're paired with for a mentoring relationship at work. So you can achieve this from a workplace mentor program. So why is having this at work so critical? For most people, our support system is outside of work. Our support system make us feel happy, accepted, and valid. Our support system gives us energy. When our support system is exclusively outside of work, our work serves as a mode of draining our energy. And while our support system outside of work builds us up, ultimately what this does is it causes us to look forward to the weekends and dread Mondays. If we're only losing energy when we come to work, we're really only relishing the time that we have outside of work, but we're going to be spending the majority of our waking hours at work. So we might as well be doing it and spending that time with people that we enjoy being around. And that, by the way, goes beyond the, hey, how was your weekend? Or can you imagine this weather? Or how are your kids? It means building a deeper bond, which also requires you to be a little bit selfish. By that, I mean you are sharing about yourself and your life, and that you would feel comfortable opening up to somebody about yourself and your life. But on the other side, being willing to listen and be intentional about what is going on with somebody else's life, that is so critical. So when we have somebody at work or a handful of people at work that we feel like is part of our support system, we start to build balance in our lives. We start to view our work as an energy giver. And this makes us happier at work and more engaged. When we're happier at work and we're more engaged, our lives are better, plain and simple. According to Gallup, 78% of employees in the United States are either not engaged or actively disengaged at work. Having a mentor at work and having a culture of work mentors can help us reduce this number and increase our, as a society, level of satisfaction and happiness with our lives. So it's a very like meta comment, I guess, to make. But if we're happier at work and we're spending the majority of our lives at work and we're enjoying the people that we're around, we have deeper bonds with them, we're much more likely to have greater satisfaction with our lives and just be happier people, which I think is kind of what we're all working towards, right? So it must start with vulnerability. Vulnerability is critical. So I've heard two contrarian point of views from the idea of being vulnerable. One is I will feel comfortable being vulnerable once trust is established. And two, I want vulnerability to happen naturally. Those are very good contrarian points, but I'm going to explain why both points don't hold any weight. In terms of what comes first, trust or vulnerability, you can't build trust unless vulnerability is established. Think about any scenario in which trust happens. Vulnerability is always the preamble to trust, always. So think about it. Partnering figure skaters need to be willing to potentially fall flat on their face and be vulnerable for the opportunity to trust that their partner is going to catch them. Or if you need to have a surgery, if you're going to the doctor, you need to have a surgery, you need to be willing to go under anesthesia, a complete state of vulnerability, and trust that the doctor is going to do her job and wake you up when you're healed. Think about the best example of trust, or the most business relevant, I guess, version of trust, that being trust falls. When you're in a trust fall, it requires vulnerability. You need to be willing to fall on your back for the opportunity to trust that your peers will catch you. I mean, let's make an example. Have you ever seen somebody not be vulnerable in a trust fall? I have, and it's awkward. It doesn't work. If you're not vulnerable in a trust fall, what ends up happening is you bend your knees, you put your arms out behind you, you're like halfway trying to catch yourself, you're not fully trusting it. You maybe take that leg and step it back. So just in case you don't feel anybody's hands on your back, you can maybe try to like recover. The point is it doesn't look good and it doesn't work, and it's not how you're going to build trust from doing something like a trust fall. And mentorship relationships are no different. So in terms of wanting vulnerability to happen naturally, that's the other contrarian point of view that I've heard is by natural, I'm taking the perspective that it feels natural for somebody to share vulnerability with somebody else. But at what point does this happen? Almost always it's happening after somebody else has been vulnerable with you. So I guess I'll rephrase that. When somebody says to me, "Oh, well, I want vulnerability to happen naturally in our relationship. I just want it to just flow out of me like as if it's naturally happening." And I feel maybe if a mentor program through work, I might not necessarily feel like it's going to come out naturally. But think about any time that you've been vulnerable with anybody and that you felt like it came out naturally. Typically, it was because they were vulnerable with you first. So the point is that it takes someone to step up and be vulnerable first, to jump off that ledge and just say, you know what? This is a time that I failed. This is a time that I've fallen flat on my face. This is something that I really want and I didn't get. Or this is something that I really struggled with and it took me a long time to overcome. And I know some people may have overcome it faster than other people, but for whatever reason, it took me a while. These are the stories, these levels of vulnerability. That is crucial to then making someone else feel comfortable with being vulnerable themselves. So the point I'm making is who's going to step up first? Who's going to acknowledge and say, you know what? I need vulnerability, or rather, I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to share with you my story of a time that I've messed up. And ideally, that becomes a launching pad for more vulnerability in that mentoring relationship. So oftentimes we will get in our heads about what we think somebody else is thinking about us. And we choose to share based on our perceptions of their expectations. I call this perceived social capital. So by this, I mean, when we are in a relationship, when we're in any professional relationship, anybody, we choose to share information based on what we think they think is what they're expecting from us. And so we choose maybe to not go vulnerable. We choose to maybe not share all the details because we think to ourselves, why would they ever want to know this information? Or why would I be valuable to them? Or, what if they judge me for me sharing? So, you know what, I'm just going to share the superficial stuff. So, case in point, when somebody asks you how your weekend was, how often do you just hear it was good, went to a basketball game, went to the mall, whatever. And that's it. Very superficial details, nothing really in depth, nothing about how I felt, nothing about the things that I did and how that made me feel, or things that maybe didn't go the way that I wanted to them. No one wants to go into those details. Why? Because people perceive that other people don't care. That's the point, is our perceived social capital is the perceptions that we have of other people in terms of what we think they expect of us. And this is the biggest detriment to vulnerability. So we all have perceptions of what others think of us, and we strive to live up to those expectations out of desire to be polite or not to want to elaborate on our way of thinking for fear that the other person is not understanding us. With vulnerability, we can remove these perceptions. We can show our true selves and be honest with ourselves about all the factors about when we failed or when a sense of trust is built between a person that we share this information with. So to break the ice and to give you an example of vulnerability, I will share with you my story. And I think this helps. I want to practice what I preach. I want to show to you that not only is vulnerability critical, but vulnerability is so helpful in any scenario, whether it be a working relationship, a mentor relationship, a personal relationship. Vulnerability is critical. So I'll share with you my story and give you a little bit of background on me. And the reason why I share this, by the way, is because I want you to get an example of what vulnerability looks like. So for me, from age 15 to age 19, I was a drug dealer. I got arrested in an undercover operation by the Indiana University Police Department when I was a freshman at Indiana University. I got 5 felony distribution charges and I was expelled from school. And that hit my life like a brick wall. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea really what my next step would be in life. Up to that moment in time, I thought success was you go to school, you get good grades, and you land a job, and somewhere along the lines, you just find yourself. And nobody that I had ever known that I thought was successful ever was a drug dealer. So I actually got really lucky. I enrolled in a program in St. George, Utah to help me turn my life around. And that was where I first got exposed to the power of mentorship. And that's where I really found a lot of value in mentorship. Now, one thing that I realized I did, and the big reason why I was a drug dealer in the first place was I had a strong desire to be needed. I had a strong desire for significance. I wanted to be significant in the eyes of my peers. I had moved to a new area, so I was a new student in a new high school, and did not think I was popular. And I decided, you know what? To be popular, I'll sell drugs because high school students like doing drugs. And I thought that would be something that would make me cool. And I did that into college. And it gave me that need that I had for significance, but it was in a not successful outlet. It was in a not healthy outlet. And that was one of the biggest adjustments that I had to make. And mentors really helped me with that. And that's actually one of the big motivations for why I started Ambition in Motion, was because it gives me a massive dose of significance. It makes me feel like I'm significant in the eyes of people. I'm helping match them together. I'm helping them potentially open up doors that weren't previously there, or have conversations that maybe weren't happening before, that now make them feel happier at work, or that they're doing something that's meaningful. And that makes me feel so amazing, and it makes me feel so great. Now, just to finish up my story, just so you can kind of understand how I got here, I lived in Utah for a year. While I was there, another big fear, another vulnerability point that I had was there was a realistic chance that I was going to prison. And I know this is going to sound maybe crass, but I only have my assumptions about what happens in prison. And I was this scrawny 19-year-old. I was 6'3", but 160 pounds. And so I went from 160 pounds to pretty much 200 pounds of like muscle. And I was working out every single day because I didn't want to be abused while I was in prison. If I were to be put in prison, that was a realistic fear that I had. And that was something that was really tough for me to overcome. And by the way, this story took me a while to begin building comfortability sharing. But I will say that being willing to share the story and being open about sharing the story has opened up so many doors in my life. And the point I'm making here with all of this is that being vulnerable is critical to, really building connection between somebody else. Because now that I've shared this story with you, if you're watching this right now, either live or you're watching the recording of this, I would imagine that you feel a lot more connected to me. You don't feel like I'm some person who's sitting on this video like a talking head. You think to yourself like, wow, here's a guy who's made some mistakes. And you know what? I may have never been a drug dealer before, but I've made mistakes. And the fact that he was so open and willing to share this with me is kind of cool. Like I make myself a lot more attractive to you because of my vulnerability. And the point is that vulnerability is critical. Now, everybody's story is different. Everybody's gone through a lot of difficult things. Everybody's faced some hardships or some adversity. That is your vulnerability. Those are the things that you can share in your mentor relationship. And those are the things that can be the launching point to building a really deep bond with somebody else. And so for you, it's all about getting comfortable with starting and sharing. I think that's pretty much it. To finish out my story, I got really lucky again. After living a year in Utah, I got re-enrolled at Indiana University. I had my felonies dropped to a misdemeanor conviction. And that's actually when I started Ambition in Motion, because I wanted to make a difference and help people pursue lives that are fulfilling to them, and they're excited to go to work, and they could have mentors that really help them launch their careers and their lives and really what's most important to them. So that is a little bit of my story, but I just want to give you an example and try to practice what I preach about being vulnerable. I mean, if you're sitting here and you're trying to put up this wall of that everything's going amazing, I've got no problems in my life, both personally or professionally, everything's going amazing. I mean, that's bullshit, and we know it. Like, we know there are things, everybody's got concerns about something going on in their life. And so I want to challenge you to really be intentional about what's going on and really think about, okay, what are the areas that, maybe I've struggled with or that I'm currently struggling with? And, how can I share this in a way that doesn't make me look bad? It's okay. These are natural thoughts and feelings to have, but at least being willing to start sharing with somebody else is critical and huge. So if you feel like you're not getting the full story from your mentor, I like to implement the 5 whys rule. The 5 whys rule is a rule that I like to use to help me better understand somebody. So the 5 whys rule is the idea that it takes asking why 5 times before you can get to the root behind why a certain action was taken or how somebody felt about that action. And it may not actually take asking why 5 times to get to understanding why somebody acted or reacted in a certain way. But most people, because of that perceived social capital, start with the reasons why based on their expectations of what they believe somebody else may think about them and what is reasonable. So asking why multiple times can help show your mentor that you care about why they acted and in that way, and help them feel comfortable about opening up on a deeper level as to why they acted. Typically, most actions are motivated by 6 core human needs. Certainty, which is the need for routine; uncertainty, which is the need for variability; significance; love and connection; growth, or contribution. Those are the 6 core needs. So love and connection are one. Um, when your answer to the questions of why ends with one of these options, you've probably found your why. So for me, my why for pretty much a lot of the things I do is a drive for significance. I have a need for significance. I also have a need for uncertainty and variability. I also have a need for growth. So for me, that is what drives me. That is what drives a majority of my actions. If you can, with your mentor, get to the bottom of what drives their fears, their vulnerabilities, the things that they've failed on, to why they do it or why they did that, to either one of those 6 core needs, you are getting to a point where you're getting to know your mentor on a much deeper level, and you're getting to know where they are vulnerable. And that is so critical. That is so helpful to building a strong mentor relationship. So if something happened, ask why it happened. If your mentor has a proposed solution, ask why your mentor determined that was the best solution. Don't fear asking why, because you believe that your mentor may be frustrated and having to answer the question more specifically. Drilling down on why is healthy and can help you better understand your work mentor. One last contrarian point that I have heard is, I don't feel comfortable, or I don't want to be vulnerable in a workplace mentorship because I want to separate my personal life from my professional life. I hear that all the time. But being vulnerable in a workplace mentorship and separating your personal and professional life are not mutually exclusive. I want to talk about that. I want to share a couple stories. It just means that there is somebody at work that you trust more than others to share things that are going on with your world. And this person gives you energy and makes you feel accepted. This is critical to feeling excited at work, to feeling engaged at work, to feeling like your work is fulfilling you and meaningful to you. So I remember, I'll give you an example. I've got a couple stories to share about vulnerability at work that I think are really kind of like shed light on like the difference between, what you might feel comfortable with in terms of being vulnerable, and, what is the line between personal and professional. The first example I like to talk about is open book management. I remember when that concept first started. I heard about it through Zingerman's, which is a popular, it's a training management company out in Michigan, which will essentially teach companies about open book management. Open book management is the management concept of sharing your financial information with your employees so they understand how the business works. And I remember a lot of people balked at this idea of open management. They said, well, you know what? They felt like it was sharing too much information with people in the company that didn't need to know, and that would negatively affect business. What was the actual result? The opposite. The business's willingness to share this financial data with their employees increased employee morale and productivity because they felt that they were more intertwined with the business. So that's just one example of a company or companies or concept being vulnerable and actually building stronger bonds between people. And by the way, this obviously I know is a business concept, but it can happen to you in terms of your personal mentoring relationship. The other story I have is from my best friend. So my best friend works at a major tech startup in California. And I remember the time that he told me that his CEO had told the entire company that if they didn't meet their numbers, by the way, numbers that they had not been close to hitting to up to this point, that they would have to close shop because their investors wouldn't fund them for a follow-on round if they didn't. And this took a ton of vulnerability on the part of the CEO. What was the result? They hit their numbers. They crushed it. They hit it out the ballpark. The people were inspired by the vulnerability of their CEO to say, hey, we might be out of business soon. We might not make it. And if we do, we all might lose our jobs. But if we can get through this, if we can hit these numbers, if we can make this happen, we can be on a much better trajectory and have an amazing story for ourselves for why we're going to be successful. So the point is that this CEO was vulnerable with his team enough to share with their team what's going on, and that actually made their people much more engaged with their relationship at work. So when I talk about separating personal life and professional life, that's absolutely something you can do in a mentoring relationship, but the key is that you're still vulnerable. So whether that be you were working on this skill that you wanted to become better at and you didn't end up getting there, or you ended up earning this credential that you ended up not even using at all and you feel like it was a big waste of time, but you can explain why you did it. Or a time that you thought you'd be up for this promotion and then you ended up not getting the promotion, how you handled that adversity. That is totally an area of where you've been vulnerable or where you've had to go through a time of adversity and you overcame it. Sharing this vulnerability is crucial to building that strong, deep bond. I mean, considering that you're going to spend the majority of your waking hours choosing, like, if you're going to choose to spend the majority of your waking hours at work, choosing to not be vulnerable means that you're choosing your work to be an energy taker from you, and that your support system outside of work is the only place that you're going to get your energy. But if you choose to build mentoring relationships, deep bonds with the people that you work with, you are going to get energy from coming to work because you're going to be meeting with people that make you feel good, and you feel comfortable being vulnerable with them. You feel comfortable sharing with them and being honest about everything going on in the workplace and what's your personal feelings on that. So I know in mentorship, a lot of the focus is on setting goals, working towards something in the future, and you will get to that in your mentor relationship. But the key is to start with vulnerability. And the best way to start with vulnerability is to talk about the past. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but on the agendas that you've had so far for your mentor meetings, all of the questions that I suggest that you ask each other are all based in the past. And the reason for that is because the past is where real things have happened, where in the future we can essentially put our aspirational BS out there. In the future we can talk about, being the CEO of our company, or making $1 million a year, or doing all these crazy things, which are amazing, by the way. They're amazing aspirational goals, and it's definitely great to have them. But they are the biggest deterrent from being vulnerable. And the reason for that is because when we are extremely aspirational about our future and we share about what we want for our future, we are less likely to be honest about our past, because we feel like our past failures will be inconsistent with where we want to go with our future. But in reality, our failures and our missteps and our mistakes are what give us the strength to achieve those goals that we've set for ourselves. So the point I'm making with talking about the past is that the past helps build a grounding, a basis for where your mentorship relationship can grow, and how vulnerability can play a really big role to building that relationship. So before we jump into Q&A, that is essentially the last part of this work, of this Lunch and Learn. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments area. I'll answer them for the last 5 to 10 minutes. But before we jump into Q&A, I like to include a topic. At the end of every Lunch and Learn, I love to include a topic with my suggested questions in terms of helping you get to the outcome of this topic. So the topic for today is accountability. And how to help your mentor with their own accountability. So maybe you're meeting with your mentor and he or she has set a goal, and maybe he or she didn't get there, or they're struggling to set a goal and they're struggling to be accountable for setting any goals and doing anything specific. This set of 5 questions has really been helpful, at least what I've experienced in my past, and both being and participating in mentor programs, as well as helping people with their own mentor programs, getting to helping them gain a clear outcome for a next step. So the first question is, when have you persisted and had it pay off for you? And the reason why that's such a great question is because when you talk about the past and we talk about, okay, here's a time that I made it through something that was really difficult and it actually worked out for me, by asking that question to your mentor, you're now getting them thinking about times that they've been successful. Because oftentimes when we're talking about a big goal that we're working towards, that we want to be accountable to, or some experience that we're trying to be accountable to, typically we give ourselves an excuse for, if we don't hit it, why we didn't hit it. But if we talk about times that we've been successful, where we persisted through and we made it happen, we now empower ourselves to realize, you know what, we can achieve anything. Like, anything's possible. Like, nothing's out of the realm of possibility here. Let's focus in on how we can more or less have a strong, I guess, future step for what we're trying to accomplish by looking at the past for a time that we've actually been successful. The second question I like to ask is, what specific actions do you need to take to meet your goal? Now, this is a great question, because as opposed to you, the mentor, saying to the person you're mentoring, hey, you need to do this, 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 and this, which is not inspiring, by the way. It doesn't inspire confidence. It doesn't inspire action, because ultimately it makes them feel like they're being bossed around. It makes them feel like they're being potentially judged. By saying, hey, you need to be doing these things, you are not making yourself relatable. More often than not, you are actually going to have a much stronger action outcome if the person who needs to take the action comes up with their own action steps. So by asking the question, what specific actions do you need to take to meet your goal, you're letting them to come up with their own rubric. So, when you meet in a month later or in a couple of weeks later, you can essentially say, hey, so I noticed that you had set a goal of doing this over the next month. Were you able to do it? If they didn't do it, then you can say, hey, well, what happened? How could you not have achieved this? This is the goal you set for yourself. This wasn't my goal. This was your goal. And so by allowing them to set their own goals, you are allowing them to really set their own roadmap for what they believe is realistic for them in accomplishing that goal. The third question I like to ask is, who can help you be accountable? So outside of yourself as the mentor, who else can help this person be accountable? Because ultimately what we know is that when you share your goals and when you share the things that you're working towards with more people, you are much more likely to be accountable to those goals, because the more you put it out there into the ether, the more likely you are to say, well, shoot, I have to be consistent with this identity that I put out there. If I say that I'm going to be someone who does this, or someone that's going to accomplish this, and I tell enough people about it, if I don't get to that outcome in enough time, I'm going to be considered a hypocrite. And so for the fear of sounding or seeming like a hypocrite, we're going to actually take action. So by asking the question, who can help you be accountable? You are now getting more people into this circle that this person now has told what they're going to do, which now encourages them to be more accountable, because hopefully they're going to ask them, say, hey, what's your status on working towards this goal? They're going to be like, I maybe missed that one goal, but I'm working towards it. I'm making up time based on the maybe the missteps that I had made towards achieving that goal. The fourth question is, what systems can you put in place to help you follow through? This is another thing very similar to asking them what steps they can take, but what systems can they put in place to help them ensure that they follow through is even better, because then they can break down their goal, the thing that they're working towards, into smaller, more bite-sized chunks. So you're letting them come up with their own rubric of how they're going to get there. This is extremely helpful towards building this goal and helping this person really formalize their thoughts about how they're going to get to where they want to be. And then the fifth question, the last question I like to ask in terms of helping someone become more accountable to the things that they want to accomplish, is what are the costs / rewards of and of not following through on your commitments? It's a lot easier to think about the rewards of following through on your commitments, but what's probably the most powerful is thinking about the consequences, the pain, because people are much more likely to do things to avoid pain than to gain pleasure. Like, oh, if I get through this, then I'll be up for potentially getting that promotion. That's kind of motivating, but it would be probably a lot more motivating if you to say, hey, if I don't end up accomplishing this to help me get closer to landing that promotion, I'll look like a failure to my family. I'll feel like I'll let my kids down. I'll feel like I let my significant other down, and that I'm not someone that's willing to put in the work to get to where I need to be. Like, that is way more motivating than the positive outcome. So the point I guess I'm making here is, by asking them what are the costs as well as the rewards of and of not following through on your commitments, you are helping them really put in their minds, what do I have to gain and what do I have to lose? And that is so critical. So let's jump into Q&A. If you've got any questions about this this lunch and learn that we've done today, please post them in the comments section. Would love to learn them. By the way, I'm so grateful. Miranda, Lori, Sophia, Navneet, Josh, Ron, thank you so much for commenting here. If you have any questions about anything at all, please post them in the comments area. I'll give a few more seconds because I know that there's a YouTube delay when you run a YouTube live session. It's about like 30 seconds. But it's looking like we don't have any questions so far. I'm glad that you all could make it. If you want to review this lunch and learn at a later date, please feel free to. I'll send you the link to the lunch and learn shortly after. So either by later tonight or tomorrow, I will send you an email with the link to this lunch and learn. And then for anybody who was not able to make the live lunch and learn, you can watch the recording when I send you the link later today or tomorrow. So it looks like we don't have any questions. I'm grateful for you all for being here today. I'm excited for you all to get into your next mentor meeting. Hopefully you found this information helpful and valuable to you. And I look forward to learning your feedback. I, by the way, may follow up with some of you who are viewing this to get your feedback on how your mentor meetings are going, as well as your thoughts and feedback on the lunch and learn. So then I can work on how essentially my team and I can improve these experiences for you. But thank you all for being here. For those that are live and for those that are going to watch the recording, thank you for watching the recording. I'm glad that you all could be here on this Tuesday. And I look forward, like I said, to you having more mentor experiences with your mentor and continuing to build this bond. And remember to be vulnerable. Thank you all for being here. Oh, there it is.